Hi everyone. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about some of the miracle stories that are happening right here in our own city, in our own state, every day. My name is Tony Kausha, and the title of our show is Tony's 50,000 Coincidence Miracles. Please note, this show is not about religion, and we're not trying to change anyone's religion, and we're not trying to get you to join any religion. It's just about miracle stories. I don't know of any religion on the planet that doesn't talk about miracles. That's why religions begin, because they have something that's telling them there's really a God. But we're not going to get into that. We're going to just talk about miracles and leave the decisions about all that up to you. So we don't care what religion you are. We just want to talk about miracles. If you are an atheist, I think you'll enjoy the program as well, although I can't guarantee you'll remain an atheist very long after you hear many convincing stories, coincidence kinds of stories about miracles. You can email me your own stories if you wish. We'll try to use all we can on the show. I can't guarantee we will, depending on volume and time, but you're welcome to send your stories on to us, and we will mention them when we can. You can send them to the following email address. But please notice that if we do use your story, we won't mention your name. We'll keep you anonymous. And we suggest that in your story, when you send it to us, don't use your correct name. That way anyone listening will not be able to figure out that it was you that sent the story in. The email address you can send your stories to is very easy to remember. It consists of 2 words and 3 numbers. The first word is Tony, spelled Tony, and the second word is and, spelled AND, and the numbers are 777. So once again, the name is Tony and 777 at AOL.com. Well, let us begin. Our first sharing today is really from a person who had an amazing coincidence miracle, kind of intricate. I hope you'll notice there are at least 3 steps where God intervened 3 times. The story begins that they woke up one morning with a bloodshot eye. Their eye was bloodshot. It was really a deep red, covered most of the eye. So they got concerned, and they went to emergency care, where you can walk right in and get instant care instead of going to the emergency room, which gets to be more elaborate, as you know. So they went to emergency care. They were able, when they got there, they were able to get pretty quick service. And it turns out that it wasn't something to worry about unless, it was a recurring problem. But after investigation, it looked like a weak blood vessel that got strained by coughing or rubbing or something like that. And it should clear up in a few days, which it actually did, cleared up in a few days. But the thing that really happened there was they met someone at the emergency care, and in the process, they began talking about miracles they have noticed in their lives. And, when you do this with people, it's amazing. You talk to strangers about miracles you've noticed, and you'll find that most people have miracles. I mean, if you live on the planet Earth, let's say you live on the planet Earth for 40 years. In 40 years, you're going to notice at least one miracle in your life. And so these people wound up sharing, and it was a great sharing. And the story relates to us is that our person was able to point out some things that they do in their life to help them notice coincidence miracles, which seemed helpful to the listener, the person they met. So they had a sense that maybe God had this bloodshot eye, maybe God had that in order to get this meeting to happen. Certainly there's some sense to that because they met at the emergency care office. So both people had to show up at the emergency care office. I guess they could have met somewhere else, but God in his wisdom apparently realized they had to meet right there on that day for some reason. And then it turns out that the next day, our person who's sharing with us got a meditation note from a group of people they belong to, where they get every few days they get a meditation email from one of the members of this group. that helps people to ponder and pray about some comments that are made on these meditations. And the message they got on this next day was so amazing, because it said, sometimes we think that we're going to the doctor for some specific need, and it turns out that God has something planned for us between our house and the doctor's office, or maybe right at the doctor's office. And sometimes when we think we're in need of going for help at the doctor's office or at the hospital, we don't realize that God is setting something up. Now, for this particular person who's sharing the story with us, this was truly remarkable, because they just had that experience on the prior day, and the absolute next following day, someone sends them a note saying that maybe, you go to a doctor, as they did in their case for their bloodshot eye, and God has set the whole thing up because he wants you to meet someone at the doctor's office or between your home and the doctor's office. So this is amazing and clear evidence of why we have this weekly show, because this is what we're trying to talk about, that every one of us has these things happening in our lives. Imagine how many times you went to the doctor, you chatted with somebody in the waiting room, and never realized that God got you there on purpose to talk to that specific exact person. You might have had a great discussion. You might have thought you were happy that you met them, or maybe they said something to you that was helpful, and maybe you just thought about it like everybody thinks about it. Wow, that was really great. I'm glad I met that person. But you see, if you go a little deeper, you start to notice the perfect timing, especially on the second day, where somebody tells you you were probably there for this reason. So this was a great thing to share with everybody listening, because it's conclusive evidence. In this case, they went to emergency care, and the next day they got a note from their sharing group saying that could happen to you, that God is orchestrating the whole event. Our next sharing is from another person who had a medical problem, and they relate to us that it was something serious. They had to get to a doctor as soon as possible, and they tried and checked the area. The only one they could get an appointment with quickly was they'd have to travel all the way to Norwich, and so they made the appointment because it was important. And they tell us that when they were checking for the time and to make the long trip to Norwich, they found out that the Cathedral, St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is located in Norwich, has a 12 o'clock noon Mass every day. And so they thought, wow, it was perfect timing. They would be able to somehow orchestrate it so they can get to Mass as well. And then they noticed that the Cathedral also offers confessions for people to come in at 11:15, 11 a.m. or 11:15, but 11:15 until quarter to 12 or 10 minutes to 12, they have confessions. So a lot of people take advantage of that. You can go to Norwich to the Cathedral and get to confession sometime around 11:15, and then still make the 12 o'clock Mass. So this person decided to do that. And the reason why this is a great coincidence miracle is because they tell us an amazing thing. They wound up getting in back of a school bus. It turned out, providentially, that they were in back of a school bus that had a license plate number 888. And as you all know by now, 3/8 signifies and reminds us of the holy name of Jesus. So here they are on their way to confession and Mass, a double-barrel blessing, going to confession and Mass on the same day. So they're heading down, and unbelievably, God creates this coincidence miracle, has a school bus that leads them all the way to Norwich. They followed them all the way to Norwich from, I think they said they were in Lebanon. So then the next thing that happened was when they left the church, and they were now coming back home or going to the doctor, I don't know which, but they said they found themselves in back of a car with a license plate 555, and I think you all know by now 3 5s means the grace of God, the presence of God, but primarily the grace of God, and grace means unmerited, unearned love and affection. That's why, olden days, the noblemen, the noble people, used to use the term noblesse oblige, which means noble people have an obligation. I think it's noblesse oblige. That's the right way to say it. Noblesse oblige, which means nobles have an obligation to be graceful because God has graced them to be nobles. Noble people have a responsibility. God has put them in authority, and then God wants to work through them. So noble people were typically supposed to be very gracious. But the grace of God is best defined by Webster as unmerited, unearned love and intervention from God. That's why it's called grace, because only God could do that. He's helping sinners every day and loving sinners to become good people every day, and that's unmerited help from God. Our next coincidence miracle is from someone who was driving home, complaining to themselves about their performance at the office. They were complaining about themselves because they felt they were reaching out to help someone, but they didn't go the extra mile. So they were faulting themselves that, they tried to help someone, but they could have gone the extra mile and helped more and done a better job. And so they were being harsh on themselves. But, as this happens to many of us in our lives, there's this tiny, small inner voice that is telling us, assuring us that we did the right thing, or we're faulting ourselves too severely. So all of us have this interior still voice, which is the presence of God speaking to us. The saints in history have convinced us of this. We've had 10,000 saints in history since the last 2,000 years. And if you read the lives of the saints, you'll find that they tell us about this inner voice. It's God speaking to us with inspirations and ideas. So while they're driving home, they're going through this battle. They're complaining about themselves, but they feel the inner voice is telling them, no, they did a good job. And then they tell us that they noticed they arrived at an intersection, and they noticed they were now following a car with a license plate number 777. And as you all know, 3 sevens is the number that connotes and reminds us of the power, the presence, and the participation of God. And I guess God was trying to tell them he was participating with them at the office. One of our listeners has suggested that we share the following miracle with the audience. This was in March of 2023. March of 2023, the year March 15th, actually, in the year 2023. There was an apparent miracle that happened in Thomaston, Connecticut, at St. Thomas Catholic Church in Thomaston, Connecticut. Apparently what happened, as the story is being related, and it was broadcast on the 7 o'clock news, so we know at least the news media saw this. They were passing out the Holy Eucharist during the Mass, and the priest gave the ciborium, the cup, to one of the ministers to help pass out the holy bread. And when the minister was done and gave the cup back to the priest noticed, and so did the minister, that the cup had many, many more hosts, pieces of bread, than when they had first begun. So there was a multiplication of the hosts while they were distributing the Eucharist. And the church is obviously investigating this miracle, and they'll confirm it or deny it. But at least they thought that I should bring it up so that you have a heads up. It's a very great miracle because it happened in the church that the founder of the Knights of Columbus was a priest there many, many years ago in Thomaston, Connecticut. You can Google Eucharistic Miracle, Thomaston, Connecticut, to hear more about this. God bless you all. I'll talk to you next week.